All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mara Perret with PartsSource, and today we'll be hearing from a customer, Mike Friesen from the University of Virginia, on strategies to help contain costs for medical equipment. Like Mike and his team, PartsSource has taken a hard look at the data to see where we can continue to partner with the HTM community to help contain costs, improve quality, and improve efficiency. We recently released results from a data analysis from thousands of clinical engineering purchases across nearly 100 health systems. The goals of this data analysis were to provide industry baselines on spending anomalies at healthcare facilities, for example, paying different totals for the same products. We also looked to identify where there was areas of great cost savings for organizations and looked to reveal opportunities for process efficiencies. Some of the findings that we were able to obtain is that very often healthcare systems are spending 10 to 30% more than best in class on medical device repair and replacement parts. We were also able to identify that very often vendor consolidation is a large issue, as most health systems must source, order, manage, and reconcile from 200 to over 700 different suppliers. It can also take an extremely long time, up to 80 minutes, to source, track, receive, and reconcile parts and service orders. And very often, healthcare systems without quality control surveillance experience product defect rates that are 6 times worse than others. After we conducted this analysis, we took a hard look at what are the critical success factors for high-performing health systems and how can PartsSource help in this effort. As we looked at the performance benchmarking across the industry, it came to light that the 3 critical key areas that we needed to focus in were cost savings, quality, and efficiency. We looked at the different ways that we could impact these 3 opportunities. One of them was to create a mobile field-based empowerment and user experience. Having a platform and user experience that was available at the tip of people's fingers that was comprehensive and robust helped us to create a better speed and return to care. We also put a lot of effort and energy into creating workflow management tools that would allow hospital systems and healthcare partners to do smart routing of orders, warranty and exchange surveillance on their orders, and help them to create more capacity for work in other areas by freeing up time and productivity of the team. In the quality arena, we really wanted to take our data science and the extreme amount of data that we've collected across hospital organizations nationally and couple that with people and expert processes and create a quality ranking module that would allow our customers to see at a glance what type of quality product they were buying. Across much of healthcare, formulary management has also been an effective tool in containing costs, and we recognize that we could apply it to the HTM industry as well. So in our current platform, there is enterprise decision support and formulary tool management to be able to produce more reliable and reproducible results. We also recognized that logistics plays a large role in the efficiency and cost savings for organizations. Where we can use data and data analytics to determine what we should warehouse and what we should inventory, and create supplier EDI and electronic interfaces on the background to be able to seamlessly transfer orders over to our supply network and reduce clinical asset downtime. The last piece that we focused on was creating timely communications for our customers. It's important to have real-time notification that allows you to know when a quote is available for a part or a service, an approval process where it's necessary, and real-time updates on order status and shipping details so you can get the part and the service you need to ensure that you can get the asset back up and running as quickly as possible for your clinical partners. We are very excited today to be partnering with forward-thinking organizations like UVA that are similarly focused on these three critical areas of quality, efficiency, and cost savings. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Mike Friesen serves as the Director of Clinical Engineering for the University of Virginia Health System. He works with a team of 30 clinical engineers and biomedical technicians to ensure the safety and performance of medical technology across the continuum of care. Mike joined UVA Health System in 2014 and has worked as a healthcare technology management professional for 30 years. He began his career as a biomedical technician in the United States Air Force, where he served domestically and overseas. He has served as a regional director of operations for a national independent service organization. He's owned a small business consulting firm focusing on assisting hospitals to insource maintenance activities, and as a senior director of professional and support services for a regional healthcare IDN. Mike graduated from the United States Air Force with a Bachelor of Science in Management. Clearly, he's a seasoned professional, and we are happy to have him with us today. So with that, Mike, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. So I'll start today telling you a little bit about UVA and the clinical engineering program here. I think that helps to give context for the story that I'll tell. Talk to you a little bit about our technology replacement program and how we leverage dollars in that program to achieve our quality goals. And then really go into a story about how we had to make a really significant change in the way that we do business around the procurement of medical devices after a very large technology implementation failed as a result of defects in the technology. So I'll start with UVA Clinical Engineering. So we are a full-service in-house clinical engineering program. I say full service because it is truly our goal to be a comprehensive program. Wherever possible, we in-source maintenance. We take care of our own anesthesia equipment, sterilizers, beds, nurse call systems, patient monitoring, and we are currently building an imaging services program that will service all of our acute and outpatient imaging technology. We're currently about 25 biomedical technicians and have 5 degreed clinical engineers on our team. Those clinical engineers make up our professional services division, where we do the vast majority of all of our planning efforts, from annual capital planning to technology planning for new buildings, including strategic technology planning for most of our service lines. Our inventory is about 45,000 devices, and we operate an annual budget of about $17 million. In addition to that, we do about $20 to $30 million in annual capital replacement program. As I said, I'll give you a little bit of insight into that program in a couple of slides. And then talk to you about how we are working to develop trust with our customers through an integrated planning effort with our service line leadership. So I'll move us on here to the next slide, I think. Okay, so a little bit about our planning and procurement process. Clinical engineering at UVA is responsible for all of our capital replacement program, including new construction and equipment planning. To that end, our annual capital plan would typically, as I said, be about $20 to $30 million. And our construction planning effort ebbs and flows with projects, but in the last 3 years, we will have done about $120 million of capital planning and execution on that. We run an annual program that includes assessment of our needs through life cycle planning. We're hoping to be talking about that at the AMI conference next year, about how we've developed a capital replacement strategy based upon a number of indicators. We work in partnership with our clinical leaders and our C-suite executives and recognize the dependence upon our vendors for the delivery of these services. So a couple of important things that we recognize in this program is that first and foremost, our program is highly dependent upon trust. Trust in being able to deliver technology that works to deliver the patient outcomes that we aspire to at UVA. And trust that has allowed our senior leaders to give clinical engineering the responsibility of implementing this program year after year. Trust in our vendors to deliver quality, reliability, and efficient implementation of equipment and systems. And then on the back end of that, our reputation in the form of safety and performance. And the story that I'm going to tell you really erodes all of those trust and quality factors. I'll jump to the next slide and just get into our story a little bit and start with this. In 2013, the medical center took on a project to replace one of its largest integrated technology platforms. This is technology that's used in every area of our hospital and is required for the vast majority of patients. The scope of the project was about $28 million. It was to be implemented over a 3-year period of time. After approximately 12 months of the project, our team identified a latent defect within the technology that resulted in a safety hazard. This equipment would, for a few seconds every hour, randomly across hundreds of patients, fail to deliver on basic physiological monitoring that would create an alarm system. We worked with this vendor for nearly a year, first in identifying that the defect was real, secondly in proving that the defect was not as a result of something happening uniquely at the University of Virginia, and third, in convincing the vendor that the defect actually created a safety hazard. And after more than a year of this effort, ultimately made a decision to cancel the contract, to remove all of the technology from UVA in order to ensure patient safety. So I can't speak specifically to the vendor or the technology implemented, but throughout my presentation, I think you'll get a pretty good sense of the magnitude of this defect. So our story is really that we want HTM professionals all around the country to understand that latent defects do exist in medical technology, and based upon the audience on this call, I'm sure you already know that. We're going to talk a bit about warranty and the legal implications of the word warranty, and we'll demonstrate how legally equipment does not need to work in order for the burden to be placed on the customer rather than the vendor for corrective action. I'll talk a little bit about vendors potentially not being able to fix the problem even if they want to, right? We recognize that the medical device industry is incredibly complex. There are limitations on vendors related to the FDA, although we would argue that the FDA did not prohibit the vendor from correcting this defect. And also that the medical device industry has become a multinational conglomerate where software may be developed in one country, hardware in another, modules of equipment in yet another country or with another division. And we talk about that because the reality is what we've found is that the vendor may not have the knowledge to readily fix defects even if they want to. Talk a little bit about vendors sharing an understanding of our definition of problem or urgency or defect, and most importantly, safety. And specifically in this case, the vendor, throughout the entire first year of the discussion, described to us their own internal risk assessment process in which people who did not work in the hospital or have hospital experience were making a decision about the severity of the defect and using that panel of people to guide their actions as to how quickly they needed to move to correct the action. So in a culture of patient safety, which I'm sure that my counterparts on this call are all living through, our role is to reduce the likelihood of a patient safety issue occurring in hours or days. We typically do not have weeks, months, or years to mitigate the risks that technology may bring to our patients, and it's important that we identify vendors who share that culture of patient safety. We'll talk a little bit more about how we're doing that in a few slides. Finally, in this story, rework was costly and complex. We had wasted a year of efforts of the clinical engineering team, a massive number of hours from our clinical team who have been through training on this technology, significant downtime as we work to replace the technology for a second time, and in the end, millions of dollars of waste in having to recreate the project a second time, and ultimately not recouping 100% of the dollars that we had paid the vendor. So we set a goal this year at UVA for me and for my team to be speaking to our counterparts wherever they would gather and wherever they would listen to talk about a set of terms and conditions for procurement that we have developed for medical technology, which protect us from these issues happening again. So some of you might say, but surely there are terms and conditions that come to us from our group purchasing organizations. And we honestly went here first. As we started to struggle with this vendor, we went to our GPO counterparts and said, you know, we did a GPO-based contract. Surely you can help us with this vendor and problem. And what we recognized very quickly is that the GPO had used the vendor's standard terms and conditions, and they had no bearing on the risks that we were facing. The GPO was more focused on price and volume and did not have any terms related to quality factors included in their base. And in this case, the GPO was hesitant to leverage their buying power to help their members, really because they didn't have their finger close enough on the pulse to understand whether or not this issue was happening in other organizations or not. I think it's important to note that GPOs are a starting point for any conversation around procurement. We use GPOs heavily at University of Virginia, and we use them as a starting point. We build local enhancements to every GPO order by adding our specific terms and conditions for quality and safety, in addition to the GPO's base terms. In all cases, our local enhancements supersede the terms that are in the GPO-based buying contracts in the event that there is conflict. So we are using the GPO as buying power, but leveraging our terms and conditions significantly in addition to those. And I would also note that many vendors will tell you that they cannot negotiate on a GPO contract, and that is just patently incorrect. There is nothing in the GPO contract that prevents the vendor from a local enhancement to that agreement. And at each occurrence, you should look to leverage value in addition to your GPO contracts. Okay, so I'll move into the presentation a little bit and talk to you about some of the terms and then we'll get into specifics as we go. So many of you might be asking, but didn't the equipment come with a warranty? And yes, it did. It came with a standard warranty as included in the GPO contract and as defined by the vendor. But here's what's important to note, is that the legal definition of warranty does not suggest that the equipment must work. It is a written guarantee issued to the purchaser that the vendor will promise to repair or replace if necessary within a specific period of time. So the specific period of time here is generally that 12-month initial warranty. But nowhere in that legal definition does it say that the equipment must work, nor does it say how long the vendor would have to replace it. So there's no urgency that recognizes that installed equipment in a hospital needs to work consistently every time. And if it has a defect, it needs to be remedied quickly. So in addition, the word warranty in no way implies that you are that you could receive a refund. The vendor's sole responsibility is to repair or replace, and if the defect is prevalent across their platform, the vendor may not have a product that is defect-free to offer to you. So refund terms become very, very important in protecting your investments in medical technology. And then lastly on this slide, I would just suggest that one of our challenges is that healthcare, all of us I'm certain, don't have a pool of dollars sitting around that if we have a failed implementation, we just have more money to go out and replace that technology with another brand or vendor. And as a result, that refund is extremely important in the event that technology fails and we need to find an alternate vendor. It becomes the source of capital. Okay, so in our story, when it was all over a year and a half later, as I said, the University of Virginia had walked away from this agreement. We did not get a complete refund, and I had an opportunity to sit with our executive leaders as we exited the relationship with the vendor. And there was a clear agreement between our executive leaders and our clinical engineering department that we could never let this happen again. And everything that I'll talk to you about from this point on is how we worked to fulfill that promise. We developed terms and conditions that are applied to significant capital procurement activities. We don't apply this to every $1,000 or $2,000 order, but system-wide purchases of high-end imaging technology, significant capital initiatives, all use these terms and conditions. This created a new baseline for what it meant to be clinically acceptable as a vendor at UVA. Not only did you need to provide equipment that was that met the needs of our clinical counterparts, but vendors had to be willing to accept these technology terms and protections in order to be considered a viable candidate in our business. And it was important that we recognized, in partnership with our executive leaders and with our medical staff leadership, that some vendors may not be willing to go down this pathway, and we had to accept that that was okay, that protecting ourselves from these defects was more important than having every vendor comply. We'll talk a little later on in the presentation about some negotiation terms and how we negotiate each time. It's a series of give and take to make sure that we can deliver technology that our clinical counterparts demand, but also with the appropriate protections to make sure that they work well. So our new standard for terms and conditions include concepts around installation and acceptance, and I'm going to talk about those. Whoops. We've addressed the old issue of vendors saying they would not give us manuals, including service literature, for free. We take on upgrades in these terms and conditions, and that's not just updates, but upgrades, and I'll work to try and define those. We take on technology obsolescence, or solving for the risk that we're buying technology at the end of its life cycle, and I'm sure that's happened to many of you on the call. Diagnostic software, our uptime guarantee, What are the remedies for failure to achieve that uptime? We're going to talk about how we work to make sure warranties are as long as possible, and the idea of the definition of a systemic failure. I'll talk to you a little bit about how we've included some terms and conditions requiring vendors to disclose performance and safety data even in advance of formal processes like recalls and alerts. And then we'll throw in a little conversation about how we're leveraging this for some cost savings on parts and accessories. All right, so we'll start with installation and acceptance. And I think the most important thing about this slide that I can tell you is that once you have accepted a piece of medical technology, the burden falls 100% on the organization receiving the technology if you are attempting to negotiate the return of that technology. So acceptance is a legal term, and in the vast majority of medical equipment contracts, acceptance is deemed, which means the vendor has terms and conditions that would say upon installation or upon first use, the equipment is deemed to be accepted, and that legally starts the warranty period. Very important to understand that the customer has all of the rights when it is pre-acceptance, and the vendor has all of the rights after acceptance. So it's really important. To this end, we have developed an uptime clause, which suggests that equipment is brand new, it's out of the box, it is as reliable as it will ever be, and we demand a 99.9% uptime period in the initial 30 days. Now that is 30 days of clinical use. This is not 30 days starting at installation. This is 30 days of clinical use. What we're attempting to do is we're attempting to measure the system's uptime in a realistic environment when being used for clinical care. And in the event that the equipment cannot achieve 99.9 in that first 30 days, we offer the vendor the ability to repair the system, to replace the system, and we begin that acceptance period over again. We allow the vendor to do that 3 times. If a vendor cannot make the equipment work to our satisfaction in its initial 30 days with 2 remediation periods, then we do not pay for the equipment. We are entitled to a complete refund of installation, capital costs. Every penny that we spend on the equipment is refunded to us because it has not achieved clinical acceptance nor legal acceptance in our environment. So I talked a little bit about the transition to warranty. Once a warranty period has begun, the clock is generally ticking for the organization to have the vendor accountable for performance. All of the terms and conditions that I'm talking about in today's presentation are tied to the warranty. So this is a purchasing contract, it's not a service contract. Terms and conditions that are added to the procurement that govern the system's performance both before acceptance and throughout the warranty period. So these terms cease to exist once the warranty is over. So to that end, it is in our benefit to have an extended warranty period. So we begin the negotiation with a 36-month warranty period. This allows these terms and conditions to survive. I would also just make sure that whenever negotiating a warranty that we are ensuring that warranty is in force 24/7, because we don't want to have defects occur outside of the warranty period and then have vendors not accountable for them because they occurred outside of some Monday through Friday 8 to 5 terms that might be specified by the vendor. In this case, we expect throughout that period the equipment to meet its published performance specifications. and this is important because what you'll find from many vendors is they do not have any reliability rate or data, and as a result, they're very concerned about going on record about performance. In some cases, we have needed to establish performance expectations to be part of the contract because the vendor could not provide us with performance data that would allow us to measure the system's performance. At the very root, equipment must work in accordance with published specification data. That could be the operator's manual, that could be the service manual, and you typically will not find defects in the equipment in the operator's or service manual, and you can use that if you need to define the equipment as not working in accordance with performance specifications. Okay, talk a little bit about a special case and our definition of a systemic failure. So a little later on, we're going to talk about how each failure results in downtime, and we measure downtime over the warranty period for ensuring the equipment is performing. But there are many occurrences with medical technology which might be a 1 to 2 second, a 3 to 5 second, or even a 30-second defect in technology, which is impactful to healthcare and to our clinicians and our patients, but may not add up to be a tremendous amount of time when measuring downtime. So we defined something called a systemic failure. This is an identical and repeated failure within a unit, subcomponent, or subsystem. And what we do is we add 1 hour per occurrence to that. So it allows us to, once we identify these systemic failures, they very rapidly escalate on our downtime calculation to motivate the vendor to take them seriously and to resolve these systemic failure. Okay? We also have a clause in here that if we disagree on whether or not a device has a systemic failure, we allow for a third-party inspector to help arbitrate that issue. We might use ECRI or some other independent organization to determine whether or not there was an identical repeated failure that would be systemic in the technology. It's also really important to understand that if this defect occurs in one of their systems, it is likely going to occur in all of them. It's just a matter of time. So I talked a little bit about the uptime guarantee. And this, for us, is really our protection over the entire course of the warranty period. We're going to define uptime, we're going to measure downtime, and we're going to work to have that downtime calculation work in our favor. For example, 1 time per occurrence or the actual measured downtime by the system. We place the onus on the vendor for providing downtime because they can typically calculate downtime out of reviewing of their logs, and in some cases, customers may not have access to all of the logs necessary to do that. So we require them to calculate it. We apply a minimum of 1 hour or the actual downtime that occurred. I will say that we have been creative with vendors in identifying ways of reducing downtime. For example, if a vendor is willing to provide at no charge spare parts that the clinical engineering team can install, whether that be 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning, then downtime is cut down to the actual time from the equipment being down until my team can install the parts and have them back online. We also look for vendors who have hot swap capable items or true redundancy. And we will even include the vendors providing loaner systems on site. So for example, if the typical warranty for something is mailing it to the vendor and waiting to get a new system back from the vendor, downtime includes all of the shipping time. In our case, we've helped vendors to reduce downtime by allowing them to keep spares on site. The clinical engineering team will swap those out and again, minimizes vendor exposure to downtime where they don't have a field service organization large enough to respond in a timely manner. So this gets into the important part. This is the remedy. Any contract needs teeth in order to be effective, and in our case, there are two components to our remedy. The first is a warranty extension. And as you know, warranty costs the vendor money, and we are negotiating for when they fail to achieve uptime, whether measured quarterly or annually. This varies a bit from technology to technology, but we look to an extension of the warranty as our first motivation factor for the vendor to correct the action. If the vendor is unable or unwilling to correct that downtime situation or that defect over consecutive measurement periods, whether those be quarters or years, then we allow the vendor to replace the system at their cost. And that is provided that the vendor can demonstrate to us that they have a defect-free version of their product. If it's a systemic failure, it is likely that they do not. And then finally, at our discretion, UVA reserves the right to return the equipment at the vendor's expense at a time that is convenient for UVA in such a way that we can continue to provide patient care and at the vendor's expense. So a 100% money-back guarantee over the course of the warranty period. I'll talk a little bit later on in the presentation about some of the vendor's concerns here. And if you're familiar with the Sunshine Act or the anti-kickback regulations, there is some concern that a vendor letting an organization use a product for half of the warranty period and then giving back 100% of the money could be seen as a violation of the Sunshine Act or free goods. We've resolved that in some cases by identifying that we would let the vendor have $1 for any part of the warranty for which the equipment is used. In other cases, we've done a straight line depreciation schedule, and in some cases, we've been even more creative with identifying a curved depreciation schedule that recognizes the value of the equipment over time. Our latest iteration of these terms also include a clause that identifies that if the vendor is unable to support the equipment during the warranty period as a result of FDA actions for which the vendor was non-compliant with their responsibilities to the FDA, that we are able to return that equipment to the vendor and receive a refund for dollars, because we don't want to be caught in the middle of these vendors who supply significant fleets, then get in trouble with the FDA and are either unable to support them over time or unable to sell us more as our demand increases for technology. So I said we also took on technology obsolescence here. This is an add to our base terms and conditions. Again, recognizing that in many cases, vendors are not forthcoming with where a product is in its life cycle. And I'm certain that many of us have been faced with a vendor who sells a product and then 6 months later, they identify that that product is no longer available as one of their model numbers, and that they're selling something new. So again, tied to our warranty, or in this case, 36 months, we define product obsolescence as when the vendor has substituted an alternate part number or version for sale to the market, when they no longer sell the product that we purchased. We've negotiated this a variety of ways, but typically we would say that we would be able to upgrade to that technology at our discretion if we chose to, and that we would get 100% of the value that we had purchased of the initial system toward the upgrade. Again, this is an area of concern for vendors because they will identify that they're unable to recognize revenue as long as they have an ongoing obligation beyond the warranty period. And we do understand that. We want our vendors to be viable and good businesses as well as good partners. So in some cases, we have allowed the vendor to come in and give us a full non-disclosure agreement roadmap in which they are able to identify to us their future thoughts around technology and allow us to make an informed decision. We may accept the fact that we're buying technology in the last third of its life cycle as long as we understand what the upgrade pathway is. And to that end, this roadmap discussion, it gets baked into the contract in a legal way so that we identify that the vendor has provided us with, in good faith, a roadmap discussion that is used in decision-making to purchase their product. Also talked about upgrades a little bit. So I'm certain that all of us have faced the situation where we get in our contracts something called updates, and these are FDA mandated updates to fix or correct action in technology, but we don't get upgrades. And what that does is it reduces the value of our purchases in an accelerated way. So suddenly the technology that we bought just 6 months ago is diminished in value because it doesn't have the latest technology. So we ask for, in our contracts, upgrades for the initial warranty period at no charge to be installed within 1 month of when they are commercially available. And in some cases, we have accepted the fact that the vendor will not provide all of these upgrades. It may impact their status as a most favored nation with the government. So in those cases, we have requested that the upgrades be provided at discounts that are commensurate to our initial equipment purchases. So in a large volume purchase, if we're getting 48% off of the equipment, we would protect that 48% off for upgrades that occur during our initial warranty period. Sorry, I won't spend much time on this. These terms are included in the document that we will be happy to share with you. But we demand all software and necessary to operate and maintain the equipment. This includes all versions of their diagnostic software. And we have found that vendors typically are unwilling to provide this unless it is included in the contract. And once it is included in the contract, we've been successful with getting all of the versions needed to maintain the equipment over its life cycle. An important point here, and one that we added as our experience with negotiating these terms grew over time, was that I talked a little bit about the vendor's willingness to share information back with us around the frequency of defects. And specifically this idea that the vendor says, well, it's only happening at your organization and not in other places. I'm sure all of us have been through that, and we've solved for that by including terms in our agreement that require the vendor to disclose to us performance and safety data upon our request, to include detailed failure data and or rates by subsystem. So we have the ability now to very quickly get data legally binding by the vendor that allows us to demonstrate that we're not the only organization that may be experiencing with this product. And it works to help expedite the vendor's understanding that they're going to need to resolve these concerns. So we've also thrown in there the old service manual topic, making sure that we are getting all the information that we need over time to maintain the equipment over its life cycle. Typically, this used to be something we negotiated a lot, but now if we've gotten through the rest of the negotiation, the vendor is typically just willing to say, yeah, we accept that and we'll provide it to you. And then I think winding down here, we've also included terms and conditions that ask for us to be considered a most favored nation with regard to repair parts and discounting over the life of system. Now, this term exceeds the warranty, where we ask to receive those discounts at the time of purchase and for them to be binding for the lifetime of the equipment. And we've had some really good savings in the out years, having negotiated discounts for repair parts at the time of purchase. So here's a little bit about actually negotiating one of these contracts. Salespeople walk in and say, yeah, I'm sure we can do that, typically followed by a call with their legal department that says, absolutely no way. We'll never accept this. We're not doing it for any other customers, and we're not going to do this for you. And executive leadership at the company is saying, we've never seen this before, and nobody else is asking for it. And this is the reason that we are out sharing this document with anybody who will use it, because we want to change that in the industry. We want this to become commonplace to benefit healthcare technology leaders across the country. And what you see on the right of the screen is that this is an actual version of one of our agreements as redlined when it came back to us. And what you can see is they redlined every single word in the agreement. Obviously, this was not a good starting point. Some of them are better, some of them look like this, and they're all definitely a negotiation. So common vendor concerns. Many of them don't know the uptime of their own equipment, and they're fearful of it. Here's what I would say. Go online to a Google search uptime calculator, put in what is 95% uptime, which kind of sounds pretty good, and then read back to the vendor how many days, weeks, and hours their equipment would be down and unavailable for service to our patients and to our caregivers if we were to accept that. Vendors are terrified of revenue recognition. I talked a little bit about ongoing commitments that are included in their contract, and if they're public companies, they may not be able to recognize fully all of the revenue associated with that deal while they have ongoing commitments to customers. What I would say here is that's okay with us. So if they need to reserve money and recognize 90% of the contract and withhold 10% for their continuing obligation, they should be doing that anyway, and we think that's a good practice. Vendors will be afraid of setting precedents, and all I'll say on this one is they've already done it because UVA has negotiated this contract over 100 times with 100 different vendors. And so the precedence is out there. If they use this argument, you're more than willing to call me or my team, and we'll help you through. We may not be able to give you all of the data for the contract, but we can definitely tell you whether or not we've been successful with negotiating these kinds of terms and conditions with that vendor. Most favored nation is brought up all the time because they have agreements with the government. And unless the government has similar terms and conditions, then there's no violation whatsoever. Violation of the Sunshine Act, I talked about that in any return of funds after the equipment has been used for generating Medicare or Medicaid revenue. Depreciation schedules will resolve this because you are paying fairly for the portion of the equipment that you used. And you're not paying for any portion of the equipment that was unavailable to you because it had a defect. And then lastly, they don't understand the intent. And it takes a bit of storytelling in order to get vendors to understand the why behind this. We have to tell our story as an industry, protecting caregivers, protecting patients, and the impact of defects in technology at the point of care. So our plan, buy-in from executive leadership, critical because this is tough. It's going to delay some medical equipment purchases, but it's a good reason to delay them. It could take you weeks or a month to negotiate these once you find the right people with the vendor to be talking about. You'll need to build credibility with medical staff leadership, clinical partners, because they've got to get on board. They've got to echo our voices in clinical engineering and say, absolutely, we need uptime protection in our medical technology, and they should expect it from the vendor. Framing why, I talked about already. Finding a business leader at the vendor is critical. Salespeople and legal people are great at what they do, but they operate with blinders on. You need to find somebody in an operational leadership role who can put together the reliability of their equipment, the value of a partnership, and the need for that equipment to work reliably each and every time in healthcare. Recognize that compromise will be required. In some cases, the vendor will have a pain point around revenue recognition. Help them to solve that pain point, and if you negotiate 9 out of 10 of these terms into your contract and you scratch one, you're a lot better off than if you didn't take on this discussion. Each negotiation is different based on the technology that you're working with, and then learn from your successes. A year later, we're pretty good at these negotiations, but I would say a year ago we were novices and we were learning each time. But you have the opportunity to build on each negotiation to learn more about how to understand how to be successful with the vendor. So I'll pause there and see if there are questions.
Great. Mike, thank you so much. As a reminder, if you have a question to submit, you can put it on the control panel, and we'll get through as many as we can with the few minutes that we have left. But Mike, thank you so much. Great overview, and we do have some questions for you. The first is, what is your capital threshold? What is the financial threshold for significant capital procurement?
Sure, great question. And I think I'll answer, there was 2 questions there. Capital threshold is $2,000 and 1 year of depreciable life. But we don't apply this to each capital purchase. We apply it to fleet level purchases. So we might be buying a whole bunch of stuff that adds up to $25,000, or we might be buying one thing that adds up to $2 million. The real question is, do you have a track record with the vendor? Do you have experience with the technology that you're buying? And do you have confidence that if you make a capital decision without these terms and conditions that you can solve that problem? So I'll give you an example. We would do it on a replacement of a fleet of ventilators. We might not do it on one specialty ventilator, if that makes sense.
Okay. Great, thank you. Another question that has come in. Do you make requirements for technical training, service manuals, and proprietary access as mandatory, meaning that if they do not agree, they are eliminated from the bid?
So I would say we're cautious to include all of these as a negotiation. So for example, if I make technical training mandatory at no cost, I may avoid $3,000 in travel and training for one of my employees. However, I may set back the negotiation on these much broader terms and conditions by demanding that. So I would be more willing, if that was a vendor sticking point, to pay the $3,000 for technical training and to get a win on one of our contract protections like uptime guarantees.
All right, thank you. We have another question. What is the average negotiation time for these strategic type of agreements?
So I would say in the beginning, when we were less experienced at it, some of these could take 2 to 3 months. And that depends on the vendor's willingness to engage and the cycle between each negotiation. In other cases, we have had vendors who are at the end of their quarter or their fiscal year who we have handed these terms and they have said absolutely, they didn't argue with one word of them, and it was done in a day or two. I would say that on average now, we probably spend about 3 or 4 phone calls with a vendor. So 1, to introduce the topic. 2, they get a lawyer on the phone and it doesn't go really well. 3, we get an operational leader from the company who understands what we're attempting to achieve. We make considerable progress, and then a 4th one to close out items. So that could happen over 4 days, or that could happen over 4 weeks, depending upon the urgency.
Okay. Mike, we have another question. How successful have you been with smaller vendors?
Actually, more successful than larger ones. So we are small vendors typically have a better understanding of how their products function as a whole, as a fleet. They typically have a better understanding of the uptime that their equipment is capable of achieving, and typically they are less risk averse. So we've had a number of small companies who are perfectly willing to stand behind and have confidence in their product and sign these terms and conditions. And conversely, with some of the big 5 vendors in the nation for medical technology, we've had very protracted and long conversations in order to get success with them.
Great. So Mike, we have 2 questions related to supply chain, and I'll combine them. One is describe the relationship with supply chain for your process, and what kind of control do you have with the supply chain team who are negotiating? Are you sitting with them regularly on negotiations?
Yes, great question. So interestingly, at UVA, our supply chain is responsible for legal terms and conditions. So think about this as HIPAA compliance, business partner agreements, indemnity, and other legal related terms and conditions. When we started this process, my team took responsibility for what we call business terms and conditions. Everything that we talked about in this document, while they become legal clauses, are related to business. And so typically we are in lockstep with our procurement. While procurement is negotiating the base legal terms and conditions, and they use our lawyers for that, we are negotiating the business terms and conditions, and these two come together at the end to become the contract.
Great.
I would just add that I don't think that any procurement department or general contracting team would be successful at negotiating these terms in isolation, because it really does take an understanding of how the technology is used in order to be successful.
So Mike, we are coming up against the hour. I want to be respectful of everybody's time today. Thank you all so much for joining. Mike, incredible presentation. Really appreciate your time today. We certainly share your goal of sharing knowledge with this community and making sure that data is driving decisions.
Yeah,
one thing go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. One more thing. So I also just wanted to offer to those who are on the call, we are willing to share these terms and conditions in Microsoft Word format for everybody's benefit. So if anybody wants them, I think the PartsSource team could include my contact information via email, and I would be happy to reply with a set of terms and conditions. And in addition to that, we're willing to answer questions and help you in the event that you get stuck in a negotiation.
Thank you, Mike. Truly appreciate that, and we will follow up accordingly with people who joined today's call with that information. As a reminder, we do have one more executive webinar for the year. Please look for registration information for Thursday, December 12th, where we will hear from Inhel Rekic from MedStar Health on cybersecurity and operationalizing medical device security. Thank you all for joining today, and have a great day.